My sister never saw it coming. One second, she's escaping into her fantasy novel. The next, a scalding latte explodes across her neck. But the real twist? Karen picked the worst possible victims. We weren't just two quiet girls in a cafe. We were sitting across from two off-duty homicide detectives. What started as a $5 coffee tantrum became a felony assault charge, and I watched every second unravel. This is what happens when entitlement meets instant karma. My little sister and I had chosen our favorite local cafe, a tucked-away spot between a florist and a bookstore. We'd been coming here for years, partly because the atmosphere soothed our nerves better than any candlelit meditation class could. The walls were painted in gentle earth tones, decorated with vintage posters of old film festivals and local art exhibits. A series of small round tables were sprinkled across the room, each accompanied by mismatched chairs that had their own stories to tell. Somehow, the hodgepodge decor never felt chaotic. Instead, it felt like a patchwork quilt, warm, welcoming, and full of character. That morning, the soft hum of the espresso machines formed a comforting backdrop. The baristas, a young team of college students and creative souls, moved like dancers behind the counter, carefully steaming milk and chatting with loyal patrons. The air smelled of freshly ground beans, subtle vanilla syrup, and the faintest hint of pastry dough. My sister sat across from me, sipping a vanilla chai latte, her nose buried in the latest fantasy novel she'd picked up from the used bookstore next door. Dragons, knights, and hidden kingdoms were her favorite form of escapism. I, on the other hand, was on my phone, only half aware of my surroundings as I scrolled through social media. My coffee, a simple dark roast, was growing lukewarm. I'd paused mid-sip when the jingle of the entrance bell cut through the relaxed melody of the cafe's indie playlist. A subtle tension took hold, as if everyone felt a warning that trouble had just walked in. She wasn't hard to spot. Short blonde bob, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a designer knockoff handbag that looked about as genuine as her smirk. Her posture radiated frustration, and her every movement said she viewed this cafe, and possibly the whole world, as an inconvenience. She marched to the counter, stiletto clicks slicing through the mellow guitar chords. "I'll take a real coffee, and turn off this funeral dirge," she demanded, in a tone that implied her words were not requests but orders. The barista, a polite college sophomore, tried explaining that the playlist was curated by the owner. Karen, as we later dubbed her, scoffed, rolling her eyes with theatrical flair. A few customers lifted their heads, curiosity piqued. My sister glanced up from her novel, then promptly looked down again, determined to avoid drawing attention. We'd seen entitled customers before, but something about Karen felt more volatile. She snatched her cup from the counter and scanned the cafe like she was on a mission. The friction in the air sharpened. I could almost feel the invisible line from her glare, seeking a target for the anger simmering just beneath her flawless makeup. She found us. My sister remained engrossed in her book, completely unaware that Karen was closing in like a storm front. Each click of Karen's heels against the floor rang out like an ominous countdown. She stopped at our table, crossing her arms so firmly that her latte threatened to spill over. Her eyes flicked to my sister, and her upper lip curled as if she'd just stepped on something foul. "What's wrong with her?" Karen asked, not bothering to lower her voice. "She's giving me weird energy. Is she even okay, like mentally?" Anger flared inside me. My sister looked up, startled, her eyes wide, the latte halfway to her lips. "She's just reading," I managed, striving for calm. "She's not bothering anyone." Karen huffed, as if the existence of my sister's quiet demeanor was some grand offense to the universe. Well, maybe she shouldn't stare. Some of us are sensitive to that vibe. My sister's cheeks reddened. She ducked her head, now gripping the edges of her book like it could shield her from this unwarranted hostility. Before I could summon a sharper retort, a distinct scraping sound echoed behind us, a chair being pushed back. The chair scraped like a gavel strike. Two men stood up at a nearby table. They wore simple clothes, jeans, and neutral t-shirts, but their bearing radiated authority. One stepped forward, voice measured but unyielding. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step away from these patrons." Karen's eyes darted to him. "Oh, who do you think you are, the cafe police?" She let out a mocking laugh, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. He pulled a badge from his pocket. "Off-duty detective," he said firmly. "And I just watched you harass this minor." For a heartbeat, Karen's expression faltered. Then, as though fueled by her own sense of entitlement, she turned back to us, voice climbing in pitch. "She keeps staring at me. Her vibe is all wrong." My sister sank lower, trying to disappear behind her book. Anger roared inside me, but I caught sight of the second detective crossing his arms, his expression darkening. That's not a reason to approach and berate someone. "Step away now." Karen's response was a flash of rage. Without warning, she lifted her latte and hurled it toward my sister. The espresso machine screamed. So did Karen. Time slowed in that split second, my sister crying out as hot liquid splashed across her neck and shoulder. The cup tumbled from Karen's manicured hand, clattering on the hardwood floor. My sister leapt up, tears already forming in her eyes as she peeled back the soaked hoodie from her scalded skin. I lunged toward her, adrenaline pumping, but the detectives were faster than me when it came to stopping Karen. One pinned her arms behind her back, while the other stepped between us and the threat. The entire cafe had fallen into a stunned silence. "That's assault," said the detective restraining Karen. "You just threw a hot drink at a minor." Karen's face went ghost pale. She spluttered out an incoherent string of excuses. I felt threatened. I have a right. I was defending my peace. But no one was buying it. She glanced around the cafe, perhaps expecting someone, anyone, to agree with her. Instead, she was met with shaking heads and concerned stares directed toward my sister, who was trembling as she dabbed at the burn. Someone shouted that they were calling 911. Another patron muttered, "Oh my God, did she really just do that?" The detective pulled out handcuffs with the practiced air of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Karen tried to yank free, but he snapped the cuffs around her wrists with a decisive click. By then, I was kneeling beside my sister, checking the blotchy redness spreading along her neck. "You're okay," I whispered, although I felt anything but calm. My heart pounded as I tried to gauge the damage. A wave of protectiveness and fury washed over me. Nobody hurt my sister and got away with it. Yet the detectives had already stepped in, ensuring Karen wasn't going to cause more harm. The cafe manager rushed over, apologizing profusely, though he'd done nothing wrong. He offered napkins, free drinks, anything we needed. My sister's eyes brimmed with tears from both pain and humiliation, and she leaned against my shoulder, small tremors coursing through her body. The hush in the cafe was broken only by hushed murmurs and the scraping of chairs as people stood up to watch the aftermath. Uniformed officers arrived within minutes. A couple of paramedics bustled in soon after, guiding my sister to a seat, applying a cool compress, and asking if she wanted hospital care. She shook her head, overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Karen was led outside, handcuffs still binding her wrists as she volleyed half-hearted protests. The detectives gave preliminary statements, their calm recounting of events standing in stark contrast to Karen's frantic denials. A few onlookers approached, offering their contact information as witnesses. The cafe manager insisted on handing the security camera footage over to the police. The entire ordeal felt surreal. Just a short while ago, I'd been mindlessly scrolling on my phone, and now my sister was being treated for a coffee burn while Karen sat in a squad car. Rage and worry churned in my gut, but I focused on comforting my sister, who was quietly sobbing as the paramedics checked her skin. Detective Roman, as he introduced himself, approached us gently. He handed me his card, explaining that since my sister was a minor, there'd be additional charges. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he told her, voice laden with sympathy. "She had no right. My sister just nodded, tears clinging to her lashes. The detective gave us both a reassuring look. "We'll need your statements soon," he said, then paused. "Take your time, though. Your well-being is the priority." When the cafe finally exhaled its collective tension, the manager brought over fresh drinks. My sister couldn't bring herself to touch hers, not after what had just happened. We decided to go home. I helped her up, supporting her as we walked to the car. The sun outside felt too bright, jarring in its indifference to what we'd just endured. She stayed silent on the drive back, clutching a cold compress to her neck. I cast worried glances in her direction, but I knew better than to push. Sometimes, in the face of trauma, the only response is numbness. Once home, she curled onto the couch, hugging a blanket to her shoulders. I ordered her favorite takeout and hovered like an anxious shadow, offering water and pain reliever. She barely touched her food, just stared at the muted TV screen. Eventually, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, she said, she threw coffee at me for existing. Her eyes glistened with fresh tears. All I did was red. I crouched beside her, heart aching. "You didn't deserve any of that," I assured her. "Her reaction says everything about who she is, not who you are." She swallowed hard, pressing her lips together. "I hate that I froze," she whispered, like I couldn't even defend myself. "Does that make me weak?" "No," I said firmly. "You're not weak. You were ambushed." The next morning, Detective Roman called, confirming that Karen was booked, then released on bail. Formal charges were being filed for assault. "We'll need you both to come in and give official statements," he said. "There's also security footage and multiple eyewitness accounts. It's a solid case." I relayed this to my sister. She absorbed the information in silence, as if still processing the idea that someone could be punished for attacking her. Usually, the quiet ones don't expect justice. They expect to be overlooked. Yet here was a detective telling her that the law was on her side. We visited the station 2 days later, a utilitarian building with a slightly stale smell of old coffee and disinfectant. In a cramped interview room, Detective Roman recorded our statements. My sister described how Karen zeroed in on her for weird energy, how the coffee burned her skin. Though my sister's voice shook, a quiet strength underpinned her words. She was done feeling powerless. As we left the station, I noticed my sister stood a little straighter. Being believed, having someone validate her experience, these were not small things. She'd always struggled with anxiety and a fear that her voice didn't matter. Now, the world was telling her otherwise. Life settled into a strange rhythm after that. My sister treated her burn. I made sure she had what she needed, and we tried to pretend normalcy wasn't shattered. Sometimes, she'd wake up shaking from nightmares of hot liquid and Karen's sneering face. Other times, she'd read for hours, burying herself in fantasy realms. I let her take the lead on what felt safe. If she wanted to stay home, we stayed home. If she needed a walk in the park, we went. Slowly, she reclaimed her sense of self. Then came the day we were summoned to court. My sister's stomach tied itself in knots at the thought of seeing Karen again. What if she just denies everything? She fretted. I reminded her we had footage, we had witnesses, we had 2 off-duty detectives. She can't just pretend it didn't happen, I said. The courtroom had the sterile feel of an institution designed more for order than comfort. Rows of benches, a judge's bench up front, and the echo of footsteps on polished floors. We found seats near the front. My sister clutched her hands in her lap, knuckles white. Karen arrived, hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a tailored blazer that couldn't quite mask the stress lines around her mouth. The prosecution laid out a clear narrative: Karen's behavior in the cafe, her aggressive approach, her decision to fling hot coffee at a minor. They referenced the footage, read witness statements, and played a short clip for the judge. There it was on a screen, Karen pacing, glaring, then the violent throw. My sister flinched at the memory, but she didn't look away. Karen's lawyer tried to claim, emotional distress that Karen felt threatened by my sister's silence. But the judge, a stern-faced woman with no patience for nonsense, seemed unmoved. When the detectives testified, they spoke calmly about how my sister had been quietly reading and how they'd intervened the moment Karen escalated. It was open and shut. My sister took the stand, voice quiet yet unwavering, describing the pain, the humiliation, the shock of having coffee thrown at her in front of strangers. Karen's lawyer asked if maybe my sister had glared at her. My sister said simply, "I was reading a book. I wasn't looking at anyone." Finally, Karen took the stand with a mix of defiance and desperation. She rambled about weird vibes and negative energies, claiming she acted out of some nebulous fear. The prosecutor countered with the medical report of the burn, emphasizing the potential harm. That was the final nail in the coffin. The judge announced she'd deliberate and deliver a verdict in 2 days. We left the courtroom, tension thrumming in our veins. Karen swept past us, ignoring our presence. My sister exhaled, relieved to be out of that oppressive environment. "I said everything I needed to say," she murmured. "That's enough." When we returned for the verdict, the silence in the courtroom felt thicker, charged with anticipation. Karen's expression was grim. The judge wasted no time, declaring her guilty of misdemeanor assault and attempted bodily harm. Sentencing was swift: a $5,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, mandatory anger management, plus $2,500 restitution for my sister's medical and emotional expenses. Karen's composure cracked, but she managed to remain silent as the final gavel strike echoed. Outside, the day was overcast, pale sun struggling to break through. My sister paused on the courthouse steps, breathing in the cool air. "I can't believe it," she said softly, tears trembling on her lashes. "She's actually facing consequences." I placed an arm around her shoulders. "You deserved nothing less." Over the following weeks, the sting of the burn faded into a light pink patch. My sister reclaimed her life bit by bit, returning to our favorite cafe with only a faint tremor of anxiety. The staff greeted her warmly, the barista offering free refills and updates on new pastry flavors. She started reading again in public, no longer ducking her head at every slight movement or a loud voice. If she saw a blonde Bob walk in, she'd tense for half a second, then realize it wasn't Karen and breathe easier. Word reached us that Karen spent her community service grumbling about unfairness, still complaining about bad vibes. Maybe she learned, maybe she didn't. But that was no longer our concern. My sister had her validation, had the knowledge that she wasn't just a doormat for someone else's rage. The bruise on her spirit had begun to heal. Sometimes we'd sit in the cafe, sipping our coffees or chai lattes, and my sister would look at the very spot where Karen had confronted her. She'd inhale slowly, then let out a breath of acceptance. "I'm okay," she said once, meeting my eyes. "It still hurts to remember, but I'm okay." I believed her. Throughout the legal process, my sister battled waves of self-doubt. Late at night, she would slip into my room and sit at the edge of my bed, knees drawn to her chest. "What if the judge thinks I'm overreacting?" she'd whisper. I'd remind her of the security footage, the statements from the off-duty detectives, and the barista's testimony. Logic was on her side, but fear doesn't always heed logic. Sometimes she fell asleep there, finding solace in shared space. 2 days of trial hearings tested her nerves. Detective Roman testified with calm precision, describing how Karen berated the staff and singled out my sister over weird energy. He confirmed my sister never engaged Karen until she was forced to. The cafe manager spoke next, recounting that he'd watched the security footage in disbelief. Patrons added their voices, each confirming Karen's aggression. My sister, voice trembling, described the humiliation of having hot coffee thrown at her simply for existing quietly. Karen's lawyer tried to spin a tale of spiritual discomfort, but the footage told a clearer story. By the end, The judge declared she'd review the evidence and deliver a verdict soon. Karen rushed out without meeting anyone's gaze. When we returned for the verdict, Karen sat stiffly in a new blazer, eyes downcast. The judge found her guilty of misdemeanor assault and attempted bodily harm, sentencing her to a $5,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, anger management courses, and restitution for medical costs. Karen's jaw tightened at each pronouncement, but she said nothing. The gavel dropped, final and echoing. Outside, my sister drew a trembling breath. "I can't believe it's over," she said, tears welling. I nodded. "You stood your ground," I told her. "You claimed your space." She offered a shaky smile, relief mingling with disbelief. In the weeks that followed, she still had nightmares, the memory of scalding coffee, Karen's contemptuous glare, but with every day, the burden lifted. Quietly, she reclaimed her routine, visiting the cafe without flinching. The barista welcomed her with a free pastry, murmuring, "It's good to see you smile." She even picked up a new fantasy novel, determined to recapture the peace that once felt stolen. Rumors reached us that Karen grumbled through her community service, complaining it was all unfair. Whether she learned empathy was beyond our control. She was no longer a looming figure in my sister's life, just a cautionary tale. My sister wore the faint mark on her neck as a reminder that even the shyest voice can ring loud in a courtroom when justice demands it. We settled back into our cafe routine, laughter returning in small bursts. Detective Roman and his partner sometimes dropped by, exchanging knowing nods. Strangers who'd witnessed the incident waved hello, relief evident in their smiles. The city moved on, but for my sister, the memory of standing up to Karen lingered like a quiet triumph. Still, the days leading up to the trial felt like walking a tightrope. My sister oscillated between anger and anxiety, unsure how a court might interpret her quiet demeanor. She worried people might see her silence as evasiveness. Yet each time doubt surfaced, she reminded herself that the detective's testimony, the manager's footage, and the barista's account all supported her truth. When she finally took the stand, she admitted her greatest fear, that her own gentleness had made her an easy target for Karen's rage. The courtroom remained hushed as she explained how she never spoke a word to Karen until that fateful confrontation, preferring to stay lost in her novel. "I was reading," she said, "and she decided that was enough reason to humiliate me." Witness after witness confirmed the same sequence of events. It was undeniable. By the time closing arguments began, Karen's lawyer was nearly out of tactics, reverting to vague claims about misinterpretation. The judge's disapproval showed plainly in her stern gaze. On verdict day, the hush in the courtroom was absolute. Karen sat like a statue, her eyes darting only when the judge intoned the list of charges. The sentencing was swift, a firm statement that no one is allowed to weaponize their entitlement against another person, especially a minor. As my sister listened to the ruling, her shoulders eased, tension draining from her posture in visible waves. For her, the moment was not just about punishment, it was about being heard. It was about all the times she'd stayed silent when people overlooked her, all the moments she wondered if her quietness painted a target on her back. The court's decision validated her in a way no apology from Karen ever could. In the aftermath, she returned to the cafe with a measured confidence. The barista smiled, handing over her usual vanilla chai latte, extra sweet. Other regulars who'd witnessed Karen's meltdown offered nods or discreet thumbs up. Detective Roman even stopped by once, enjoying a day off, and gave my sister a friendly wave. She mustered the courage to wave back. Though the red mark on her neck gradually faded, it remained a quiet symbol of a battle waged and won. The memory still stung of hot coffee, scalding words, and a fear that choked her voice. But in its place grew resilience, the knowledge that she deserved safety and respect just like anyone else. Step by step, she found her footing, discovering that justice could be a steady hand in the aftermath of cruelty. And if Karen learned anything from community service or anger management, it wasn't my sister's burden to find out. Healing doesn't hinge on the offender's growth. It hinges on reclaiming peace, on trusting that one's voice matters. In a world where too many suffer in silence, my sister's testimony rang out, a soft but unwavering declaration that no one has the right to trivialize another's existence.